Welcome to the third module of the Superhero Entertainments course, Superheroes Across Medium. There are 3 lessons in this module: Superheroes in Comic Strips and Radio, 3.2 Superheroes in Movie Serials and Animation, 3.3 Superheroes in Television. This is lesson 1 for the module. In this lesson, I will cover the spread of superheroes from comic books to comic strips and radio serials. By the end of this lesson, you should have a good understanding of the importance of media to the popularity of superheroes, the manner in which appearances in non-comic book media shape particular superheroes. Let's talk about superheroes in comic strips. Many superheroes added a comic strip to their comic book adventures. Such a move was a very natural thing. First, as you will recall, superheroes developed in part out of the action and adventure and science fiction comic strips like Buck Rogers. The first comic book superhero, Superman, added a comic strip to his appearances very early in his career. You'll recall that Jerry Siegel and Joe Shuster originally conceived Superman as a comic strip character, so the addition of the strip was a natural extension. Superman first appeared in Action Comics 1, June 1938. This comic would have been on the newsstands in March 1938. The success of Superman in Action Comics quickly resulted in the McClure Syndicate negotiating for a comic strip version. Siegel and Shuster entered into a revised contract with DC dated September 22, 1938 that included a provision for the comic strip. The strip was a good deal for Siegel and Shuster, given that they had signed away their copyright for $130. The comic strip gave them 40% of the profits, with DC taking 10% and the McClure Syndicate 50% from the third year on of the strip. The strip commenced on January 16, 1939. The Sunday strip commenced on November 5, 1939. At its high point, the Superman comic strip appeared in 300 newspapers, and it continued to run in newspapers until May 1966. There are many fascinating points here. DC were willing to pay Siegel and Shuster a significant percentage of the earnings from the strip to get them to do it. Legally, DC owned Superman, so why were they prepared to pay so much for the strip? Most likely, DC paid them so much because they wanted the comic strip version to carry the signature Siegel and Shuster. This is our first key point. The convention in the late 1930s was that comic strip and comic book writers and artists signed their work. The creators were an important part not just of creating the comic, but also in marketing them. Our second point. DC wanted to expand the appearances of Superman because they realized the greater his exposure, the more chances they had at licensing him. In this, they had the example of Mickey Mouse and the Disney Company, which by 1934 made more money from licensing than from cartoons. Batman was the second DC comic book to become a comic strip. But in his initial incarnation as a comic strip character, he only lasted from 1943 to 1946. Likewise, Wonder Woman received a comic strip incarnation, but she only lasted from May 1st, 1944 to December 1, 1945. None of the other major comic book superheroes I have discussed so far appear in comic strip versions. Although DC was keen to market its comic book superheroes beyond comic books, only Superman managed this transition to comic strips in any lasting way. This is our third key point. Comic strips appeared in newspapers and were distributed to those newspapers by syndicates. The syndicates had different editorial standards than comic book publishers, and newspapers had more adult audiences. Only Superman could make that transition. So keen were DC to expand the reach of Superman that they financed the production of a radio serial in 1939. In the 1930s, it was not uncommon for many comic strip characters to also appear in a radio serial. Remember too that in 1939, television, although technically possible, had not yet become a commercial medium. At the time, companies generally sponsored radio serials to reach particular audiences with their product. DC decided to produce the radio show, initially without a sponsor, because they expected to sell it to one. They also expected to make money elsewhere by promoting Superman on the radio. In mid-January 1940, Jack Leibowitz, one of the owners and then the main manager of DC, wrote to Siegel that, quote, "We plan to go after various licenses." He informed Siegel that DC had signed a deal with Heckler Productions for a radio program, and although the program would lose DC $700 a week, Leibowitz hoped for more stations and a sponsor to turn the loss to profit. This is a box set of the Adventures of Superman radio serial released by the Smithsonian Institution in 1997, just before they did a Superman exhibit to mark the 50th anniversary of Superman. As you can see, it's on an audio cassette. That's how long ago 1997 was. Because various companies did not renew copyright, the radio serial is in the public domain, and you can listen to the first pilot episode DC produced and many other episodes at the link provided here. The pilot episode is fascinating because instead of a corporation sponsoring the serial, it is presented by the Blank Corporation. The radio serial is very important to the history of Superman as a character and as an entertainment because it broke the bounds of comic books and strips to appear in a completely separate medium. There are no images in radio, and yet Superman, a visual character, could make this transition. And one very important thing happened in the radio serial. One of the most famous things about Superman is that he fights for truth, justice, and the American way. This phrase was first in the introduction to the radio serial in August 1942. You can hear it in this link here. DC made an effort to produce a Batman radio serial, but it did not succeed. There was apparently a short-lived Captain Marvel radio serial, but nothing remains of it. This is our last key point in the lesson. DC was able to move Superman from a visual medium to an oral medium. This showed the appeal of superhero entertainments was far greater than just comic books. This is the end of this lecture. This lecture had 4 key points. Review your notes and go back over the video lesson to ensure you have those 4 key points noted. Coming up, lesson 3.2, superheroes in movie serials and animation.